Excellent. We are live. Hello, Felicia.
Hello, Daniel. I'm so honored to be here and to be having the opportunity to chat with you.
That's awesome. I'm honored that you would actually do it. And also, and we'll start right away with Felicia. And I just did my lip balm thing before I sat down. Um, Felicia is the editor-in-chief of LA Yoga Magazine. And those of you on the audio, I am pointing to a copy of LA Yoga Magazine that's on my wall above my head. And you've been that for a long time, right?
I have been, yes, I have been. And I've been involved with LA Yoga since the magazine founded. It was founded by a mentor of mine in 2002. Yeah, in 2002, as a community building, as
Oh,
a way to help build more community around yoga in Los Angeles and beyond, and to share stories about yoga and people doing yoga and yoga as a lifestyle and everything related to yoga that transcends and goes beyond different lineages, different traditions, different studios as a way to just kind of share that. And I started out as an intern and worked with my mentor, and then I was the associate editor and the editor in chief, and just it's been a big part of my life for a long time and a way to be of service, and also a way that I've had the opportunity to learn a lot about yoga myself.
service is such a thing that I didn't think about until I was older.
Mm,
But it's such an important component now in my life and to um, interacting in the world around me. So it's cool that you said that. How long ago did you think of that in terms of service, or has it become like something that you realized at some point that it was a service?
that's a great question. I think for me, I've always had the attitude or the perspective around it that it's been connected to a sense of dharma, a sense of purpose, a sense of giving back. I think for me, for maybe the whole time, it's had a component of service to it. That, and I think service can take lots of different forms in the world. And service can take forms in the world of showcasing other people. It can take forms in the world of what do we do? What does it mean to give of ourselves? What does it mean to have, a certain generosity of spirit? What does it mean to try to be helpful? Or there's lots of different ways to be of service that we can look at. Being of service also relates to the quality of kindness and compassion that we might bring to our interactions or to our work.
Yeah. It's it's interesting to me that it took me a long time to understand that component. I think that I started out with a very what this sounds very personally judging of myself, but I was very determined in a selfish, willful way with the way that I wanted things to go, and it's not until I got into yoga that I kind of started even considering service. And I didn't call it that for a long time. I think I picked that word up in a 12 step or something.
Mm,
Um, but I remember early on in getting into teaching, one of the things I wanted to do, because the place that I taught, like if the teacher couldn't make it, there wasn't a class.
right.
And when I became the teacher there, I'm like, I want to just make sure there's always a class. And that is some kind of like form of service.
Yes.
So that was there.
Well, that is a
So
form of service, of
yeah,
making sure that there is already always a class, making sure that there is always backup, making sure that you are stepping in when needed. And it's interesting that you mentioned the 12-step community. Service is a really big component. It's one of the steps. It's talked about a lot. It's talked about a lot in terms of even the organization of meetings. And it's also talked about a lot in terms of a motivation or a sense of purpose, or those things that keep us from being too internalized and keep us motivated, keep us uplifted, and keep us remembering that there is something beyond ourselves. And that's also a large part of yoga, is that we practice for ourselves, but we also engage in service to be connected with the community and the world around us.
Yeah, because service gives us, as you said, a sense of purpose. And without a sense of purpose, often we become kind of adrift.
Yes.
And I think I think that happens. I think it's a pitfall. Although I think becoming adrift is probably a nice moment. You have a chance for awakening to yourself or of yourself. So,
I think you can become awakened when you are adrift if you use that energy of spaciousness and being adrift in a way that is conducive to that. Because there can also be, and I think this is why service is part of 12-step communities, there can be ways in which being adrift, we then look for anchors. So sometimes those anchors are things that are actually sustainable and that sustain us. And sometimes those things that we look for as anchors can be destructive.
yeah, it's it seems like there's a lot of times where we get to kind of like crossroady situations where we have decisions to make, and uh, and a lot of for me, we get into moments of maybe fear or fear and worry, and we have to go outside of the, or I don't know. I remember having a moment where I thought I had a path, a choice, and I remember something inside of me saying I had to go to this lighter area that was going to be more of service and more so-called spiritual, and that the other direction, which may have seemed like, I think a lot of people turn to anger as a
Mm,
way to protect themselves. I think it was Brene Brown said the armor that you create as a child eventually turns in on you. Um, so like those moments, but for me, I had that moment where I had to make a decision. And if I went to the darker, which is what I normally did, that was my go-to. I
yes.
lived there in that because it was very like comfortable and it felt like I was protected. But I knew that this, in that moment, if I went there, I was going to not, I was going to be in trouble. So
Yes.
I went to this other side there. I don't know. Yeah.
That's, so beautifully expressed too, because there are these different, emotions or protective mechanisms that can turn on us. And where can we be in a space of not just sustainable, but affirming, or maybe not affirming isn't the right word. We're not trying to affirm something that's negative, but that place of self-inquiry or that place of finding an anchor, that place of engaging with the world that actually allows us to have forward momentum, that allows us to have a healthy relationship with ourselves and with others.
Yeah, and you said something in that statement about emotions, which I ended the last class or the last podcast with Jenny, and I talked about like these emotional states that we get into, and I was talking, I think, about the dark emotions,
Mhm.
um, but I only because that was the moment of that conversation. But emotions become very like it's like a possession, even when they're really good. Like when I get excited about a project, like a music album, or writing this thing for you, and I feel like sometimes my emotions have more authority over my actions in these contained moments. And I've been digging into that lately. Do you have a comment on that?
That's a really interesting thought too, in terms of, because emotions are what we feel, right? But they are distinct from who we are. So we are also, and this is something that comes up in the yogic teachings, that we are in many ways the observer and the experiencer of these emotions. And I think that there can be something too where we can get overly identified with different emotional states. And that can also be what can be a trap, but there can be a freedom in recognizing that we are experiencing and observing the emotional states, and experiencing and observing, because we're not just observing, we're actually feeling them. We're feeling the from the biochemistry of it to the excitement of it to the, influencing the actions we take from it. So there's a lot of different layers to that.
Yeah. And then I hear this, I heard something else while you were talking about this, and I've heard it in like different books and different classes. And it's interesting how like and the phrase was like the letting go phrase, letting go of trying to control the emotions, because like a bad emotion, we're always like trying to like push it away, which ultimately, and I'm reading the letting go book by David Hawkins
Hmm.
right now. But it's funny how many different times I've heard about letting go and understood it or not understood it on varying levels. um, but somehow I heard that when you were speaking.
Well, and it's interesting, and even what you said, when we try maybe too hard to judge our emotional states, that this is good or bad, or that there's in the yoga tradition, it is said that the clinging to something and the pushing it away are really two sides of the same, um, sort of sticky state. And the more we try to kind of push away the things that we judge as bad, the more that they may stick to us, rather
Yeah,
than accepting them. Can we accept the totality of our emotional experience and not get too caught up in it, and also not try to push it away? These things are bad, these things are good. I want more of this and I want less of this. It's like, but to understand that we are influenced by all of it. We are experiencing all of it. We are deeply, deeply feeling all of it.
yeah. How in the last, well, almost, let's say 6 months to a year now, have you dealt with the collective emotional experience? Do you take any of that on personally?
I personally think it's maybe kind of impossible not to in some ways. And one of the things that I think can be valuable, and I talk about this a lot in different kinds of settings and conversations, is to be really honest and compassionate with ourselves, to recognize that, as a human community right now, the emotional, the heightened state of emotions, the baseline levels of stress that we're under, the, even the vibration of this uncertainty, the not knowing, the all of it has an effect on us. It has an effect on us collectively, it has an effect on us individually. And to be honest with ourselves about that, and to be compassionate with ourselves in the recognition that, that is an added aspect of what we are dealing with, just being alive right now.
Yeah. I
And yeah.
I had a great realization. There was a photograph of me and I looked at it and I'm like, you're holding the world on your shoulders. I see it. And in that moment, I was able to recognize it and I was able to realize that I can't do that. You
Yeah.
know, that the burden of that is too much.
The burden of that is too much. We must give the world back to the world, right? Instead of
Yeah.
trying to hold it on our individual shoulders, but to also recognize that we are influenced by the images that we see on the news, and the conversations we have, and the challenges that, we as humanity are facing, and the heartbreak and the sorrow and the division and the anger and the confusion and all of it. And it does affect each one of us, even if we are practiced at letting go,
Yeah.
and to recognize and to say it's okay to give back to the world, and to do our best to show up with clarity.
Yeah. That's a great statement. Give back the world to the world. That's brilliant. I love that.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that we abdicate responsibility or that we give up, right? It's a little bit different than just giving up or saying we can't do it or we can't participate. It's like, okay, we still do have to find ways to participate and to do our best and to be kind and to be compassionate and to to make a positive contribution, and to know that just by being alive right now, we might have to be extra kind to ourselves in the midst of that process.
Yeah. And that can be difficult, I think, for some of us, or at least for myself.
Oh, it's hugely difficult.
Yeah,
It's a
right.
massively difficult thing to do. It is massively difficult, especially when, we feel like we should just be able to push through, or especially when you think, we're having this conversation in February of 2021, and um, this time last year, the world was a completely different place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there were so many things that we're navigating differently right now. And I think it is perfectly okay to be honest about that, that this is challenging.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I had a I had a challenging experience last night that I want to mention and see if you've dealt with anything like this. So, some of my classes now are on Zoom, and I started out actually trying to do them on Facebook Live, and that was a nightmare. Facebook kept kicking me off, and it was very kind of stressful trying to transition into this somewhat online thing, which I don't do 100%, but for the first time last night, someone Zoom bombed me
Ah,
during class, and um, it was very frustrating. And I went through a lot of different emotions while trying to maintain the class,
yes,
and trying to figure out what person I have to get on and push the button and try to, remove them. And then
yes,
students are leaving because, it's an upsetting situation, and like trying not to like scream into the computer, I'm going to kill you,
yeah.
or whatever madness. Yeah, that was a good moment to like, we test ourselves in those moments. It's difficult.
It's very difficult because the reality is that the world that we live in, we do kind of live in a time of trolls, right? People trolling on comments on social media, people trolling on kind of fake follower bots, people trolling on Zoom bombing. For what purpose, right? Why is this happening? And what have we done to deserve this trolling? Well, it's just an aspect of what is happening in the world right now. And the more we walk forward, the more trolls are going to cross our path in one way or another.
Yeah. I just like sometimes I think about the people that, I like Gary Vaynerchuk quite a bit. I follow him on a few different mediums, and he talks a lot about the negative comments, and he's always like, he's well, his thing is that I kind of feel sorry for those people, and I'm kind of very sad that that happens, and he had puts it in this framework that these people that are trolling and doing these things are damaged, and they're dealing with things in their damaged space, and he's not taking it on. I think he said yes the other day about somebody wrote something, trolly, a comment, and how he went to their page and said, well, I'm sorry, you don't like this or that, but I think you're a great photographer or something. And I was like, wow. And then I went completely to the other side. I'm like, I've never got a reply comment that on any of your things. Maybe I should have said something bad, but it was great how he addressed that.
Yeah, and that's, a great example of really taking the high road, right? What does it really mean to take the high road? What does it really mean to not allow yourself to be swayed by the opinion of somebody who doesn't actually matter,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, I wouldn't recommend you make trolley comments just to get, somebody to look at your Instagram.
Right.
And it's hard too because we do love to be seen, right? And there is that
Yeah.
aspect of what it means to be a human being, that we want to be seen, we want to be recognized. And there's, I think, sometimes some trolley comments or trolley experiences or trolley bombing can happen because there is that base need that we have as humans.
Yeah. I was very, very in the early podcast. My friend Samantha is a Orthodox Jewish woman and a teacher, and she was talking about people needing attention. And I was talking about, and it's the same kind of thing as trolling, but you'll notice like some people will cross the street when they're not supposed to cross the street, and so people blow the horn at them and they yell out the window at them. But that person, I often think that, it's negative attention is better than being ignored.
Some people feel that way.
Yeah,
Yeah, in some situations that negative attention is better than being ignored.
yeah,
That happens.
yeah. And it's funny you said, because I analyze myself quite a bit more than I probably should. And you said that thing of us having people pay attention to us, because I remember like I went through this like crossover in my life, where I went from, I was trying to be this musician, and I almost don't want to say it, but like trying to be a rock star, which I really didn't understand what that meant at the time. And then when that stopped, I kind of like wanted to just be a common man.
Mm.
But the great irony, and I didn't notice it at the time, was I ended up uh, going into this other position where I'm standing in front of a large group of people and they're looking at me and I'm telling them what to do. I'm like, oh, okay, how did that happen? It's very interesting, very
It's
interesting.
very interesting. So that playing out of something, which is the interaction of the class, the audience, and in many ways, being a musician, a performer, member of a band, and being a yoga teacher share some similarities. And I don't think it's just about, okay, look at me, I want that attention. But it's more about what's the exchange of energy and what's the exchange of ideas and what's the exchange of this sense of performance and entertainment, but upliftment and inspiration. Because sometimes we look at entertainment as something negative, but being entertained is a beautiful thing. Being entertained is also a way in which we can seek inspiration, a way in which we can identify. Why do we love music and lyrics so much? We identify with different emotional states, going back to that conversation around emotion. And even with yoga, we want to be inspired. We want to feel part of a community. We want to feel comfortable in our own skin. Those are all things we seek out when we seek out performance, live performance, being at a concert. We want to be part of something. We want
Yeah.
to feel comfortable in our own skin. We want to feel a sense of emotional connection. And I think both yoga and music can offer us those kinds of experiences.
Yeah. And it took me a while to understand everything, but it took me a while to understand what the yoga experience is in America. Um, and that it is about kind of people getting together and people being able to be in this safe space where they can kind of like hang out, do something in a community, and then walk off feeling a little bit better than they did when they got there.
Yes.
And I don't think that was the origins of yoga, having, but at least that's what it was for me. Do you see it similarly?
Yes. And I think we also have to remember that the origins of yoga um, came from a different time and place, and also
Right.
came from a time and place where most of the people practicing yoga were coming from that maybe renunciate standpoint, or coming from, okay, I'm going to leave the world and go pursue yoga as a form of enlightenment. Whereas today, the way yoga is done in the modern world is seeing as, I think, still a seeking or a searching for something, but coming from a different context in terms of how it fits in. It's not just people who are leaving the world behind, but people who are finding ways to navigate living in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Great. And it's funny that originally yogi was kind of seen as someone escaping the world because, well, it took me 6 years to read the Bhagavad Gita,
Mhm.
but I did read it. and, and I don't know that I understood it, but someone else explained it to me in this kind of short explanation. And there's this moment where the Godhead tells Arjuna something, and it's something of the effect of we have 1 foot in the heavens and 1 foot on earth.
Mhm.
And that is the whole, it's our responsibility to the divine and our responsibility to our life here now in this world, which if you're escaping the world via going to a cave and meditating and doing yoga, you're kind of throwing part of that away. Um, I've often thought, I don't think we've come to Earth to ignore Earth. Um,
No, and that's in many ways when we look at, say, the Bhagavad Gita, for example, it is a book that takes place, or it is a set of teachings. I don't want to just say a book, but it is a set of teachings that takes place in the context of talking about really being a warrior, and not just a warrior in terms of being at war, but being a warrior in terms of what does it mean to integrate these kinds of teachings and taking care of a family. So then it is 1 foot in the world, 1 foot in the world beyond this world, or 1 foot in the spiritual, 1 foot in the material, and all of that. And I think it's also important to remember that when we talk about yoga, yoga isn't just one thing. There are forms of yoga that are about leaving the world. There are forms of yoga that are about not necessarily concerned with taking care of a family, but there are also forms of yoga that are about what does it mean to have skillfulness in action. And that's actually in the Bhagavad Gita. Um, Krishna gives that as a definition of yoga to Arjun, that yoga is skillfulness in action.
yeah, it to me it's interesting how the popularity of yoga in the last 10 or 20 years has really aligned itself on a physical level with playing against what we're doing with our hands and necks and shoulders and minds in the modern world.
Yes.
As this like healing modality.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot now in terms of yoga as a healing modality, and in terms of yoga as being able to be more skillful. Like, what does skillfulness in action mean? And it can often mean that sense of the healing modality. And I think, in terms of, and I know on the wall behind you is an article that you wrote, and the photos are of you for LA Yoga Magazine about yoga for musicians. What does it mean to use your hands skillfully? And what does it mean to have a practice that allows you to continue to use your hands skillfully?
Right. Yeah. And I learned that on the road, and I practiced on the road because the road is extremely physical,
Hmm.
um, and you're jet lagged. I mean, I remember getting on stage and my hands like shaking. I was jet lagged. I hadn't slept for a couple days, and then you have to go into this muscle memory. So the body is really kind of crying out for tenderness and to be taken care of in a proper way so that you can deliver the vibrational energy of the music that the people came to experience through your performance.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing energetically to do, to have to kind of show up to deliver songs and music and words and the muscle memory and to tap into all of that. And that you have to also be able to give yourself a lot in order to be able to give it out.
Yeah. I thought of two different things. Have you ever taught while sick?
Yes.
Right.
Well, yeah, and I mean different kinds of sick, right? Because especially in the world right now, it's like we don't want to have to teach when sick, right? But I have
Yes.
taught when sick, and I have taught, last year I had I don't want to say I was sick, but I was dealing with some fairly significant things, and I taught I taught, let's see, maybe a few days. I think one situation I taught 4 days after having surgery, and another situation I taught 8 days after having surgery, and teaching in situations where, yeah, I wasn't like necessarily at my most, best physical prowess, or teaching in those moments, yes, where I've taught with a migraine, or I've taught, in challenging situations where you're having to kind of overcome, yeah, overcome whatever it is. And that may be where you were going with that question. So I'll give it back to you in terms of what it means to teach when sick. Or I'm sure you had times where you were on stage, like you said, um, not having slept or actually being sick.
Yeah, that was a great learning tool for me. And it's my father's birthday today.
Ah,
And I text via my mom because my father doesn't, he has a phone, but he won't text on it. I actually didn't get to speak to him, but I spoke to my mom. He was taking a nap, and so there's a lot of times where, yeah, I'd go on stage as a musician, or where I show up to teach class where I'm not 100%.
yes.
And I remember in the 70s, when that real bad flu was going around, and everyone in my family was sick, everyone, including my father. And we were on couches and beds throughout the house. And my father crawled around on his hands and knees to take care of us because he
Mm.
was so sick. And that, and I approach a lot like that, because you want to, if you can show up to do, and I mean that's an extreme view, but that was his family. But like, to learn to step up and perform the ceremony, or the gig, or there's 300 people that paid, and their whole, I mean, when I was on the road, these people were like, we've been waiting a year for you to come here, we want to hear that song, and we want to sing, and you're like, well, I have a cold, it's like
Yeah, and how do you tell that to someone who has been waiting a year?
right,
That's, whether you thought of it as service at the time, that is a we can also see service as an aspect of responsibility, an
right,
aspect of what does it mean for us to show up for somebody else.
yeah,
And ideally, hopefully, and this is maybe where dharma comes in too, or that purpose, hopefully we have the opportunity to show up in such a way that it is also something that is part of, the passion, our passion, that when we can show up in such a way that we are living our passion. And an artist, a musician, there's that sense of passion with what you're doing, or that love of what you're doing, and the creativity or the artistry. And when your artistry, in whatever form that takes, can match up with somebody else's desire for connection, somebody else's emotional reaction to a song, somebody else's appreciation of the yoga sequence or the experience, right? When that match happens, that's the real magic of, I think, being human.
yeah. And that's funny, I would never call myself this, but like, when you say that, I feel like a magician,
Yes.
a vibrational magician, even as a yoga teacher. And it's so similar, like the well, the feedback loop, playing rock and roll, like, mostly I've played mostly at clubs, but there's a little bit of a mild disconnect, because the rock and roll audience is drinking and talking to someone, or there's like, I remember the Who saying, we play really loud because if we play that loud, no one's talking, you know there's only us. But in yoga, and especially when I played music in yoga, there's a different vibrational circle. It's a smoother um, kind of transaction than the
Right.
club and music. Like, you can feel it becomes this wheel that is real clean, Like people have done a sequence and they're laying in savasana and you're playing guitar and you can almost feel the music inside of them coming back out to you and then going back. It's really incredible.
Yes. I love the way you talked about that. And I think that is something when we have the opportunity in whatever aspect of the vibrational magicianship exchange of that, when we have the opportunity to experience those moments as human beings, that truly is magic. And that is truly something where we feel happy about being alive.
Yeah. And those moments and it's like I don't want to become attached because that's the opposite of it, or like addicted to those moments. But those moments are such alive moments where
Yes.
you're like, I understand.
Yes.
This is it. This is why we are here.
Yes.
And it's a powerful, and then it moves on,
Yes.
which is great. Have you been teaching on Zoom at all?
I have taught in some ways on Zoom. I haven't really taught like ongoing drop-in classes, but um, I teach at Loyola Marymount University in the professional yoga therapy training program. And so I've taught
Oh,
over Zoom. I've taught some workshops and things over Zoom. I've taught some asana over Zoom. So I have, and it's an interesting thing because I think the gift is it's something that's available to us right now.
yes,
I
absolutely.
I think I find it a little harder to feel that connection or exchange because even one of the things around just the mechanics of being on Zoom, we don't get to have clear eye contact. We're either looking at a camera or we're looking at the face, but we don't get to see eye to eye. So that's something that is missing a little bit. But I think there is still the opportunity in what's available to us right now to connect to something that's beyond the physical space that we are in. And
Yeah,
I am grateful for that.
absolutely. We're totally lucky that it's there. The thing I wanted to ask you about is, so when I'm teaching on Zoom, so when I teach normally, I don't do the majority of the poses. I'm
Yes.
not doing every class I teach. Sometimes I'm teaching over 10 classes a week. It's not physically possible.
Yes.
Plus my own personal practice, what I'm doing. So, but when I'm on Zoom, I kind of have to do the practice, which is a little bit different. Um, and I'm not, and I'm talking
Right.
while I'm doing the practice. So a lot of times I'm not breathing and I'm like trying to figure that out still a little bit. Like I'll come up from something and I'm like, you're going to pass out. Don't pass out on this Zoom class. So yeah, it's been an interesting, and it's slowed me down, which is good.
Mm.
Um, I remember in a review of my early teaching, someone said, he teaches so fast, I think eventually he'll slow down. I was infuriated. But yes, I'm in that space now where I have to stand for a moment, say, okay, we're just going to stand here for a moment because I need to catch up on my breath.
Yes.
Have you experienced any of that?
Well, and it's interesting. I think that's a very powerful realization. And I think, especially because when you're teaching on Zoom, people are interacting with you in a different way. So there is a little bit more of a different kind of visual. And you have to, like, I've found times when I've taught on Zoom and I want to see what the other people are doing. It's almost like I have to stop what I'm doing and tell them to just keep going. And then I have to kind of look and see and like look back and forth and like scroll through and make sure I'm kind of checking in with everybody. Whereas if we're all in the same place physically, there's a little bit more of that organic opportunity to see everybody all at once.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of that attention split and that happens, both in terms of, okay, how am I in the camera frame demonstrating something physically?
Right.
How am I making sure that I explain it? I mean, I've always thought that teaching and practice are two different things, right?
Yeah.
You don't really just do your own practice when you're teaching. You're teaching in such a way that you're explaining something for the delivery to something else rather than um doing a practice. So
Yeah.
teaching is a separate category of this practice of yoga, of this interaction with yoga, of this relationship with yoga. Teaching is definitely its own category. But then teaching via Zoom has its own, yeah, it's own category within that.
Yeah, it took a while to even get comfortable with the propos I mean, I wasn't born in the world that we're in now. I mean, I still don't like to take my own photo to put on Instagram. It makes me
Mhm.
uncomfortable. It seems weird, so to set up a camera in my house, my apartment, and say, okay, now everybody, I'm going to be in front of this camera and I'm going to do this thing.
Right.
It's very, it was very different I've gotten used to it, but in the beginning it was very different. And like it was a little disconnected.
Mhm.
It doesn't feel as disconnected now to me. And I found ways to connect more. But yeah, in the beginning it was a little disconnected.
Yes. Yeah, and
So
it's interesting because I've also taught, I've taught for Yoga Glow or Glow, so I've taught on video for a long time, but that's a very different kind of video experience than teaching a Zoom class in real time. Because I've either
yeah,
taught with people physically present to a camera, or I'm the only one in the room with a camera, but I don't have to, I'm not interacting with people in real time. So it's a very different thing to teach to a camera than to also just teach over Zoom.
yeah. And I mean, I was taught initially to teach Mysore Ashtanga.
Mm.
So
Oh,
I'm a
that's
hands
very
teacher.
different.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's like could you move your foot 1 inch to the right, rather than just walking up there and putting your foot against their foot and kind of like shoving it a
Yes.
little bit, which is the way I was taught to teach.
Yes.
So
That's a
like,
very different teaching methodology
yeah.
than even what's kind of available in the world today.
Well, yeah. And there have been times where like, well, I've been teaching long enough now that most of the people know me, but I'll have to say that when I'm not doing it now. Um, there are some of my private clients that I still am able to interact with and touch and move and stuff. But in general, because I'm back at Runyon, I'm not walking around touching everyone where
Yes.
as I used to. But even when I used to, because of the way that the world is shifting and because of the way that yoga is shifting, there's still this element of like, is it okay for me to do this?
Yes.
I've had to learn how to read people,
Yes.
um, which is like such this extra skill level that you don't know you're going to need at some point. And like you can tell when you walk towards someone, like what the parameters and like how to gauge whether you can like push their arm over
Right.
1 inch. I want to ask you, so you're teaching at Loyola Marymount. What is, I can't remember the teacher's name, the a man who studied with Christian Acharya, who used to be the main teacher training guy there.
Are you talking about Larry Payne?
No, an Indian guy.
Oh, Srivasta Ramaswamy.
Ramaswamy, right. Is
Yes.
he still there?
He is still there.
Oh,
Yes.
wow, far out.
Yeah. 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 He taught remotely this fall. He taught an intensive also through through Zoom. But yeah, he still does Srivasta Ramaswamy. He's not there all year round, but he is still associated with Loyola Marymount University, and he did, study with Krishnamacharya, and he still teaches. Yeah, he still teaches at LMU.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Well, it was to me. And I don't, I haven't, I was always surprised that it seemed like there's a part of the yoga community who's not super interested in the lineage.
Mm.
Like I remember when Patabi Joyce's son came to town, I was so excited, and people were like, and I was like, wait a second, this is the guy that came from the guy or whatever. It was an interesting moment for me.
Well, I think that humanity in general, I think the yoga community is a subset of humanity, right? There are some people who are interested in that and super excited. And there are some people who don't feel that that's where their attention is or anything else. And I think that we see all of that in the, subculture of yoga that we do in the larger world of people who are interested in lineage or history or where things come from, and people who see it only from a slice of a moment or a modern context or the amalgamation of what something is or just
Yeah.
all of it.
Or what they're even getting out of it,
Yes.
maybe, or why they showed up.
Yeah. There's all
Um,
of it.
yeah. Um, so as a registered nurse and a practitioner of Ayurvedic medicine, so when I was in India, my meditation teacher sent me to get Tripala, which I've heard some people call Triphala. Do you have which one?
Well, here's the thing about Triphala or
Okay.
Triphala is that what I was told is that the F sound, the fa sound, is
Uh-huh.
not really a sound in Sanskrit. It's not really, so if you're really pronouncing it using the rules of the Sanskrit language, it'd be Triphala or
Tri-
Tripha, and I'm completely mispronouncing it, but it would not be fa. But
okay.
I was told that the sound fa, it does show up in Hindi or does show up in some modernization of different things. But Triphala, or like I said, I am not necessarily pronouncing it correctly right now, but yeah, Triphala, Tripala, Triphala.
Yeah.
Yes,
So my meditation teacher told me to go and get it, and I had
yes.
to walk down this very long street, and there's this guy who had monkeys on strings jumped out at me. And he wanted like a donation, or he was like a street beggar. But when I got there, on one side of the street was the Western Medicine Hospital, and
Hmm.
on the other side of the street was the Ayurvedic Hospital. So you, as a registered nurse now teaching Ayurvedic medicine, are there connecting lines?
Oh, I believe so for sure. And one of the things that I see in Ayurveda is Ayurveda has a viewpoint or a definition of health that is inclusive of body, mind, heart, and spirit. And when we talk about health from the perspective of Ayurveda, we're talking about balance in terms of the physical body, but we're also talking about mental health, spiritual health, dharma, letting go, gratitude, all of that falls into health. And also from the perspective of Ayurveda, even though Ayurveda, is a long tradition of, and a long textual tradition of using different plants and herbs as medicines, using different massage techniques, essential oils, foods, breath practices, yoga asana, everything else. Really, from the point of view or the perspective of Ayurveda, everything has the potential to be medicinal. And Ayurveda also has a history over thousands of years. And at different points of history, there have been different kinds of things used for diagnosis or medicine. So, really, from an Ayurvedic perspective, it's not a situation of you can choose Ayurveda or Western medicine, but how can you even use the diagnostic techniques or the different kinds of things available in Western medicine in an Ayurvedic way? In a
Right.
way that is promotional of health and well-being, not just of our physical body, but all aspects of ourselves. So nursing too is a discipline that at its best, at its heart, is very holistic and does take into account the holistic nature of health being, again, body, mind, heart, and spirit. So I see a lot of connection and congruency. And I
Yeah.
also think that we don't have to choose one or the other. We don't have to just choose whether to take Triphala or whether to take aspirin, but we can look at what does it mean if we really approach our health and wellness from a multifaceted perspective.
Yeah. That's great. It's funny you said aspirin. I always think of ginger, which is I studied with the Dr. Nagaraja, and he said
Uh-huh.
I should take a spoonful of ginger every day. He
Yes.
told that to the whole class, powdered ginger, no matter of your dosha or what have you. He also said to me, if your client comes to you and he has hypertension, tell him to lay down. And then like Savasana was the answer to so many of his questions. If they're having this trouble, you tell them to lay down.
Well, Savasana is a good answer to many questions.
Right. Yeah.
Savasana is just a good answer to many questions.
Do you think I get and I have not a lot, and I shouldn't notice, but there are oftentimes the people that leave before Savasana. And you're like, it's only a couple minutes. Come
Yeah.
on, stay.
You can do it.
Yeah, I don't say that, but it's interesting that people think, oh, I don't need to lay down. But as a practitioner and as a teacher, the laying down is very important.
Well, I have heard, and I believe this to be true, that Savasana is also a practice of digestion. It allows our nervous system to digest everything that we've done. But I think it is also important to remember that it is a confrontational practice because confrontational in the fact that we are confronting ourselves. And
Right.
sometimes those moments when we don't have the any kind of distraction around us and we have to be with ourselves can be very uncomfortable. That's an intense thing to do.
Yeah.
And to be in that intensity, we have to be, again, compassionate with ourselves or even with other people, or even when we see somebody leave before Shavasana, and we might think, but you need it.
Yeah.
It's like the digestive mint, it's like the ginger, it's like the right, it's the whatever it is. It's like the cup of coffee after dinner. Maybe coffee is a bad example. But um, it is that digestive situation, but it is also confrontational, and sometimes that self-confronting can be uncomfortable, and we may not be ready for it sometimes.
Yeah, that is the truth. May not be ready for it. That is like, um, and I never thought of it as confrontational until you said that. And it is confrontational on the interior, and it's
Yes.
self-confrontational. It's very, you can really simplify things, from the outside, and people are like, I'm going to stretch, I'm going to do some push-ups and breathe, and. But there's this other element that, um, yeah, I'm stuck on that confrontational. That's great. That's,
Mhm.
that's great. I was going to say the F word, which you're allowed to say here. It's fucking great. It's, I actually, this has been such a great conversation. I didn't ask you any of my questions, so I'm going to go to a couple of them that I wrote down. Why did you go to your second yoga class?
Oh, that's such a good question. Why did I go to my second yoga class? Because there was no question of not going.
Right. Was there an experience in the first yoga class, or like a, um, why was there no question?
I think because I felt like doing yoga gave me the opportunity to start to develop that positive relationship with being in the body.
Right. Okay. Um, this is a weird transition. And I've asked you this actually before because you've been doing yoga a bit longer than me. I started doing yoga about when LA Yoga started, somewhere
Uh-huh.
around 2002, 2003. Actually, I was pretty unaware of it. It was very outside my everything. Do you got to get that?
Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know. Let me see.
And we will be right back.
Okay, I'm okay. Sorry about that.
Good, no worries.
All right.
Um, oh, yeah.
So doing yoga. So you started around the time LA Yoga started and
And
around,
this,
yes.
yeah, this is a weird question, but
Okay.
so I always, you know, yoga clothing didn't always exist.
No.
So what did people used to wear before yoga clothing? Were it like those spandexy things, or did men just wear like gym shorts and a t-shirt? I mean, I've seen the Punjabi Joyce video with Tim Miller and Chuck Miller, and I think they're just wearing like tank tops and
Shorts.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and here's what, because when I first started doing yoga was before Lululemon existed and before all the explosion of anything. And there was a few things. One is that people would do maybe yoga with, like, men would do it with shorts, with maybe bike shorts underneath. So that way, if you like flipped over or flipped up, right, that you weren't flashing everybody.
Right.
Sweatpants. There was a lot of
Right.
sweatpants and t-shirts,
Okay.
or sweatpants and t-shirts and tank tops,
Right.
and just kind of the clothes that you would wear to go to the gym. And there were some leotards, and
That was the
I
word I was looking
yes,
for.
the leotards word. So the spandex, what you're talking about, spandex, because I
Right.
did start practicing yoga right around kind of late 80s, early 90s. So that was the leotard and spandex and leg warmers era,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So, yes, so leotards and sweatpants, or leotards and, like, it would be fine to like wear a leotard with sweatpants. Like that would be a legit thing to wear.
Right.
And so, and I think that there was also, around that time too, and there were a couple companies like that would make kind of leotards for yoga, and leotard like bodysuits for yoga. Like I had one, and you see them in some of the like the even from the 70s, because the 70s was also a time of leotards, right? So the 70s and 80s you had like leotards and spandex, and I even had a couple of bodysuits in the 90s of like the leotards with legs kind of thing,
Right.
right?
Right.
And that you'd see that in, a lot of these, some, Iyengar photos, or some of the yoga journal photos from the 90s. Like you
Yeah.
didn't see the proliferation of the yoga clothes, and some of it would just be t-shirts and anything else, but some of it would be, different versions of leotards.
Yeah. There's that video of Elvis, uh, and he's singing something about yoga, and yeah, there's everyone's in those like kind of leotardy things.
Yeah.
Um, so did you do your early classes at a actual yoga studio?
Um, some, yeah, some at a actual yoga studio, some at, community center, some at,
Right.
like a gym, or some at like a YMCA with like the room of with yoga, or some at like a, wellness center multi-purpose room, and some at a college, right?
Right.
So some when I
Do
went to
you
college.
do you have a heart out at 4 here?
No, I'm okay if you want
Okay,
to, yeah.
good. How much has this is such a I know the answer on such a big question. How much has yoga changed in that time period?
Well, here's the thing, and I think, think about that a lot, right? That I think what it is that more people practice yoga. So if we look at, you know, Elvis and the leotards, and, we can look at like the dancers who would wear their dance clothes to yoga, or, the Indra Devi and the leotards, right? So we're still talking about the leotards, but I think what has happened over time is more people practice yoga. And so what you have happen is things just from a scale perspective. And so what I think too is that you see, and I think this was true, even over the past few decades. There are some people that practice meditation first and foremost. There are some people who practice yoga predominantly as a spiritual practice. Some people specifically as a form of exercise, and everything in between. I think if we look at, how the way yoga's changed, maybe there's just lots of different ways to do it. Lots of different brand names and perspectives and variations on the practice. But in some ways, there's always been a lot of variations on the practice. We just have a greater explosion of all of it because of more people doing it. And now there's more different kinds of yoga clothing, and more different kinds of yoga mats, and more different kinds. So it's almost like there's just more. And more doesn't just mean numbers of people, but ways to approach, or varieties of the practice, or all of it.
So the first time I went to India, they didn't have yoga mats.
Yeah.
And there was one block, and it was made out of wood, and it was on top of a shelf covered with dust.
Yes.
So when you started, did you have yoga mats, or
When
did
I
you
did
have,
my first teacher training, I did not own a yoga mat.
wow, Was it, you had a, did you have a yoga, no, I can't remember what they're called, the rugs,
Oh, like the
the,
Mysore rugs or
yeah,
those types
yeah.
of rugs? No, I think we just because again, we were like in a multi-purpose room at like a gym or a YMCA. I'm trying to think if we had a rug. I know I didn't own a yoga mat. We might have been like doing it like in the same room like they used for everything else so that there were some kind of like gymnastic mats on the floor and stuff.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah.
That's far out.
Yeah, I didn't have a rug either. I finally did get a mat at one point, but
It took me a while to get a mat, but for different reasons. I thought if I get a mat, it's like, I, I felt like if I got a mat, I would stop doing it. I don't know
mm,
why I thought that. I didn't want to get into like the kind of buying of things. Like I didn't want to get into the consumerism of it. So I'm like, I'm not gonna. I didn't buy yoga. I had cut off like army pants that I would. That was my yoga thing. That's what I took those to India and just like a tank top. And for the longest time, I didn't have a mat. And then one of my teachers would start giving me a mat. He's like, use this. I was like, and then I got kind of stuck on it. And
yeah.
then I was like, okay, now I have to get. It's a very different practice with a mat compared to a Mysore rug or compared to not having a mat as
It is a
far
very
as,
different practice. Yeah.
the feet are, you really need to get into the feet when you don't have that grippy mat thing
Yes.
happening. It's much, the underside of your legs are really to hold warrior two on a carpet is not easy. Um, holding warrior two on a rubber mat is way easier than holding it on a carpet.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things I liked about not having a mat as well, is I like sort of the purity of it and the just kind of, feet on the earth kind of it. I did like that. And maybe, this speaks to, when you ask, has yoga's changed? I do think there is more that sense of the mainstreaming of the commercialization of yoga, that yoga is now part of, full on part of our mainstream culture where there is the commercial aspect to it. But I think that's also been a part of things for a long time, just in a
Yeah,
in a much smaller scale.
yeah, because I think I was very punk rock about it. And I remember at one point, like, and I felt like yoga got kind of co-opted by the fitness community. And I felt like when I first started it, it hadn't happened. And then over like that first 10 years or something, it started to pop up in the gyms and stuff a little bit more. And then people started like putting it in that same category. It was when I started, at least for me, it wasn't in that category. It wasn't about uh, physical fitness to me at all. For me, it was about emotional, mental, and spiritual fitness.
Hmm.
And I remember saying in class, I didn't start this to be like a physical fitness instructor, you know,
Right.
um, but it like some people see it as that now.
Well, there's an aspect of that, right? And I think there's also an aspect of part of it is as humans, we need physical fitness.
Yes,
So,
especially, yeah,
especially now. And I think this is one of the places that people have been getting it.
yes, absolutely. Before we finish out, LA Yoga Magazine, are you still doing print through this year? Have you done it through this year?
With the just kind of the way the world has kind of been running through the blender and scrambled, we haven't been doing print. We've put that on hold just because of, so many places being closed temporarily or just, with so many of the stay-at-home orders. We are still doing a digital magazine. We send out an email newsletter every Thursday,
I get
and
it.
we actively send out the email newsletter, and we send out new stories and new things, and we do try to talk about, what's happening in the world, offering solutions for just stress reduction. We're going to be launching a virtual film series coming up. So
Oh,
we're
far
not
out.
doing a print magazine, but we are doing things like a meditation Monday on Instagram,
I
and
saw that.
offering some teachings, getting excited about doing some virtual film things. And just, I really want to do more to share where people can find yoga at this time.
And that's, I have two questions, and this always happens. But question number one is, how do people get on that mailing list to get that newsletter that you always write a little thing at the beginning of.
I do always write a little thing in the beginning. You just go to our website, layoga.com, and you can
Okay,
sign up for the newsletter.
great. Because
And yeah,
and then not doing print, and I thought that would have to be the case because all the yoga studios are for the most part closed. And I've been thinking about this because I've been watching it. Yoga Works filed for bankruptcy in October,
yes,
and they were bought by a company last month called Go Digital Media Group LLC.
interesting.
Um, yeah, and I've been watching them on the stock market a little bit.
Well,
And
they had an IPO that did not do well, and they pulled themselves off of the stock market.
okay,
Yeah, so they actually pulled themselves off, and they gave up the leases to all their physical studios sometime last year. And and I think it's an example of just the shifting. I think yoga is here to stay,
yeah,
but just the various kinds of business and things involved are shifting.
yeah. I guess it has to. Um,
Because the world is constantly shifting.
yeah, and and we're in a big shift in the moment. The
We're in,
digital version, I'm sorry?
yeah, we're in a massive shift in the moment. I think we don't even necessarily even understand the shift we're in right now.
No, that is extremely clear to me
Yes.
that the world is changing, and I think that is a part of the anxiety, or
Yes.
at least I think humans want this, like, I want to know what's going to be there when I get there.
Yes.
And at this point, it's not possible.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
No, I don't. And that is a huge part of the anxiety that we're facing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you asked something about the digital magazine.
Yeah. Do you get that? Do you have to subscribe to that, or is that on the website?
Basically, we're kind of doing it, I've thought about doing an actual like packaged digital magazine. Right now, we're just doing a lot of news stories on the website.
Okay.
So I call it a digital magazine, but it's basically our website and storytelling and sharing stories. And we're trying to find creative ways to do that because I think we're all looking for those continued creative solutions that we find through yoga and the inspiration that we find through yoga.
Do you do that as a story by story basis, or do you do it like an issue where you put a bunch of things together and put it out?
We've been doing it more on a story by story basis, which has been an interesting thing for me because for so long, I put things together in terms of issues. So I would put things together in terms of themes and stories and things in blocks and releasing them all at once. But that also speaks to just kind of the way in which we're interacting with media in the world right now is a little bit different, where it is more of a continuous stream of things.
Yeah, content, content, content. To quote Gary Vee again.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So, and I don't want to go too much into it, but when you were doing print, there was probably was it a lot more work? Were there like 16-hour days sometimes?
It
I
was
had
different kinds of work,
yeah,
and the thing about doing print is when we would have a print deadline, we would actually have a scheduled time when we were supposed to be printed at the printer, and we would have a schedule for, the being the magazines actually going through the printer machines. And if we
right,
missed that schedule, it would throw everything else off. We would have to wait until the next opening. We would have a schedule in terms of our distribution and our delivery and everything else. So there would be a time in my life where tomorrow would no longer exist, right? Because you know how any day, whatever I don't finish today, I can finish tomorrow. So
right.
there would always be a moment of hitting that deadline where tomorrow would no longer exist.
Yeah,
So yes,
yeah,
I definitely, as all my friends know, would have 16-hour days, or I would have plans that I would have to cancel, or I would have things because there would be, okay, and once something is in print you can't change it. Like the other thing is like doing things online. If I make a mistake or if something goes through, I can go back in and change it. You can't like take back a print run.
right. I guess
So
there's
there would
a
be times I would be like, I would have to cancel plans to be fact checking something or to be completing something or to be finishing something in some way.
yeah, fact checking. That's awesome.
Yeah, I know. I
Keep,
do believe in fact checking.
yeah, I love that. I
Hmm.
just don't feel like I see that enough anymore.
Yeah, I
So,
think hopefully it's still out there in the world,
yeah, well, I'm
right?
glad
I
that
do. I still fact check.
that's fabulous. That's
Yeah.
fabulous. So I often end like this. We've had a long talk, so whatever the answer is up to you. But is there anything you just want to generally tell the world?
Oh, I think maybe generally tell the world to remember that compassion for people around us, compassion for ourselves really does matter, especially now more than ever when we the rules seem to be shifting around us in ways that we don't really understand.
Right,
The more
right.
compassion, the better.
Awesome. That's great. I'm going to do a little sign off and I'll keep you on Zoom to say goodbye. But
Okay.
thank you so much for being on the podcast. Everyone listening, please like, share, and subscribe, and everything that everyone tells you to do. And let your friends know what a cool episode this was. And that is it. And we will see you next time. And I am signing out right here. Namaste.